Most people don't realize this until they've already been drained, until they've been pulled so far into someone else's orbit that they can't tell where their own identity ends and the other person's demands begin. A narcissist doesn't walk into your life and announce themselves as a tyrant. They walk in like a savior, a partner, someone who just gets you. They read you closer than anyone ever has, and in that reading, they quietly mark the places where you doubt yourself. They don't attack those weaknesses immediately. No, they feed them. They wrap them in flattery and attention, so you never think to guard them. And for a while, it feels intoxicating. They make you feel chosen, special, seen. But there's a catch, and the catch is that this version of being a seen is not about understanding you. It's about mapping you. They're collecting coordinates to every place in your soul that still questions its own worth, because that's where they'll build their power. The truth is, a narcissist is not sustained by love. They are sustained by dependency, and dependency grows in the soil of self-doubt. As long as you're uncertain, you'll keep reaching for their validation, their approval, their recognition. And each time you reach, you give them a little more control over your sense of self. But then something happens. Maybe it's gradual. Maybe it's one hard, shattering moment. It's one hard, shattering moment. You start to see yourself clearly, not the way they've defined you, but the way you actually are. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop bargaining for permission to be yourself. And in that clarity, something shifts. You no longer accept crumbs of approval as if they were a feast. You start realizing you can feed yourself, and that's the moment they panic. They will not say they're panicking. It won't always look like anger. Sometimes it will come in the form of sudden affection, desperate charm, or dramatic promises to a change. But underneath, there's fear. Because once you know who you are no longer programmable. Their script stops working. You see, the narcissist's greatest fear isn't losing you. It's losing access to the version of you that needs them more than you need yourself. When you gain strength, you're not just walking away from a bad dynamic. You're threatening the entire identity they've built on being the one in control. Strength in this sense is not loud. It's not about shouting your worth from the rooftops. True strength is quiet certainty. It's the refusal to participate in the games that once kept you trapped. It's walking into a room knowing that your value does not fluctuate based on who approves of you. But that kind of strength isn't given. It's earned. It's earned through nights where you question everything, where you feel the pull to go back because it would be easier than standing on your own. It's earned through the uncomfortable work of facing your own part in the dynamic, because no one stays in a narcissist's grip without, in some way, cooperating with it. And that's a brutal truth to swallow. They could only manipulate the parts of you that were willing to be manipulated. That doesn't mean it's your fault. It means you're not powerless. You can close the doors they once walked through. You can reclaim the territory they once occupied. And you do it not by fighting them harder, but by becoming someone they can't reach in the same way ever again. When you stand in that place, when you've faced the hard truths about yourself and chosen to grow instead of retreat, they can't hide anymore. Your presence becomes a mirror, and that mirror doesn't reflect the image they've tried to project. It reflects their smallness, their fragility, the emptiness they've been covering up with control, and they will hate it. Because to look at you is to see the truth about themselves. That's why strength feels dangerous to them. Not because it harms them directly, but because it strips away the illusion that they've spent their whole lives protecting. And here's the part that will either free you or offend you. Once you see that weakness, you can never unsee it. You can never again convince yourself that their power was real. And when their power is gone in your eyes, the spell is broken. The moment you know who you are, you don't just stop feeding their ego. You become the mirror they can't bear to look into. And the day you stop looking away from that reflection is the day you walk out free. When you refuse to be manipulated, you reveal how little they actually have to offer. This is something most people don't want to admit. Because to admit it is to confront the reality that much of what you thought was a love or connection was really a transaction. A narcissist doesn't build relationships on mutual respect. They build them on subtle contracts you didn't even know you signed. The contract says, I'll give you attention, affection, and a sense of belonging as long as you let me define the terms of your worth. And you go along with it. At first it seems harmless. They say the right things. They make you feel important. But slowly you start to notice that every ounce of care comes with a string attached. You can have their affection, but only if you agree with them. You can have their approval, but only if you make choices that serve their image. You can have their presence, but only if you shrink the parts of yourself that make them uncomfortable. That's not love, that's a power exchange disguised as intimacy. The reason manipulation works so well is because it appeals to our deepest fears. We are all, in some way, afraid of rejection. We crave belonging. And if you haven't yet built a strong foundation in yourself, the threat of losing someone's approval can feel unbearable. So you start to negotiate with yourself. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe I can let this slide. Maybe I'm overreacting. You chip away at your own truth to keep the peace. And with every compromise, they gain more ground. But there comes a moment, if you're lucky, when you realize the cost. You see that in this relationship, you've been trading pieces of yourself for scraps of validation. And suddenly you start to ask a dangerous question. What would happen if I stopped playing along? That's the moment the dynamic changes. When you stop being manipulated, when you stop responding to guilt trips, when you no longer rearrange your life to avoid their disapproval, when you stop chasing their praise, you're not just breaking a pattern. You're holding up a mirror to the truth they've been avoiding. Without control, they have nothing of substance to give you. Because here's the thing, narcissistic power isn't rooted in strength. It's rooted in dependence, not yours on them, although that's how they maintain it, but theirs on your willingness to give them a stage. Without that, their performance falls apart. And once the performance is gone, so is the illusion of who they are. You'll see it in their reaction. The charm may drop instantly, replaced by anger or coldness, or they may double down, suddenly becoming generous, attentive, even loving, anything to get you to step back into the role that kept them in control. They're not doing this because they've changed. They're doing it because they're losing their supply. It's in this moment you need to be brutally honest with yourself. If their relief disappears when their control disappears, was it ever love at all? Or was it just a system where your worth was measured by your compliance? Refusing manipulation isn't just about saying a no to them. It's about saying yes to yourself in ways you never have before. It's deciding that your values are not for sale. It's accepting that some people will walk away when they can no longer use you. And that's not your loss. It's your liberation. But be warned, this kind of freedom comes at a cost. You will have to face the silence that comes when you're no longer performing for someone else's approval. You will have to sit in the discomfort of feeling alone. You will have to confront the truth about why you stayed as long as you did. That's the part most people avoid, not because they can't leave, but because they don't want to face what leaving will reveal about themselves. Yet that's exactly where your power is. In that quiet, painful space, you start to see clearly. You start to recognize the difference between someone who truly loves you and someone who loves what you can give them. You start to realize that real connection doesn't require you to shrink, to silence yourself, or to bend your moral spine just to keep the peace. And when you truly grasp that, there's no going back. The hooks no longer sink into you. The strings no longer pull you. You look at them, not with hatred, not even with anger, but with the clear, unshakable awareness that they can no longer define you. The day you stop being manipulated is the day you discover how little they actually had to offer, and how much you've always had within yourself. Your boundaries are a threat to their survival, not their feelings. Most people misunderstand this. They think when someone reacts with anger, coldness, or guilt trips to their boundaries, it's because they've hurt that person's emotions. But you have to understand, when you're dealing with someone who's built their sense of self on control, boundaries aren't just inconvenient, they're dangerous. To them, your no isn't a disagreement, it's a declaration of independence. And independence, in their world, is the beginning of their end. A narcissist's sense of stability depends on one thing: access. Access to your time, your attention, your emotional energy, and, most importantly, your willingness to make them the center of your decisions. Without that access, their entire system starts to crumble. Because the truth is, they can't regulate their own worth without pulling it from you. And if you've been playing along for a while, you've been giving them a steady supply. That's why, the moment you draw a clear line, you'll see a shift. Suddenly, the warmth cools. The compliments fade. The subtle punishments begin. They'll accuse you of being cold, selfish, or ungrateful. Not because you've wronged them, but because you've removed their lifeline. I've seen people crumble at this stage They hear those accusations and panic. They start defending themselves, over-explaining, trying to prove they're still good, still loving, still worthy. And in that over-explaining, they accidentally step back over their own boundaries. The hook sinks in again, and the cycle continues. But you have to see this for what it is. It's not an emotional misunderstanding. It's a survival instinct. When you set a boundary with a narcissist, you're not threatening their feelings. You're threatening their ecosystem. You're cutting off the oxygen that keeps their control alive. And if you mistake their desperation for sincerity, you'll get pulled right back into the game. Boundaries at their core are not about controlling another person. They're about defining the terms of your own life. They are the lines that say, this is where I end and you begin. This is what I will allow into my space, and this is what I won't. Healthy people can respect those lines, even if they don't like them, because they understand you have the right to exist as a separate, autonomous person. A narcissist can't. To them, your separateness feels like betrayal. And here's the hard truth. If you've been living without strong boundaries, they've gotten used to a version of you that is available on demand. A version of you that absorbs their moods, that bends to their needs, that sacrifices your peace so they can avoid facing themselves. When you start to change that, they'll see it as you taking something away from them, something they believe they're entitled to. You have to decide in that moment whether you're going to shrink back or stand firm. Because boundaries will cost you something. They will cost you the false peace that comes from giving in. They will cost you the illusion that keeping someone happy will keep you safe. They might even cost you the relationship itself. But the alternative, the life without boundaries, will cost you far more. It will cost you your clarity, your self-respect, your emotional stability. It will cost you the ability to look in the mirror and see someone you recognize. And that's a price you cannot afford to pay forever. It's not enough to draw the line once. You have to keep it. That's where the real work is. Because once you've declared it, they'll test it over and over. They'll poke at it from different angles. They'll try charm. They'll try anger. They'll try playing the victim. Anything to make you move it just an inch. Because if they can move it once, they can move it again. And every time you hold that boundary, you're not just protecting yourself, you're teaching them something they don't want to learn. You are not theirs to control. That lesson won't be received with gratitude. It will be received with resistance. And that resistance is proof that you're doing something right. The day you realize their outrage isn't proof that you're wrong, but proof that you're no longer available to be used, is the day you stop living in reaction to their needs. And that's the day you start living in alignment with your own. Because when you draw a boundary with someone who feeds on control, you're not just telling them where they can't step, you're reminding yourself where you finally stand. The second you stop explaining yourself, you take away their last weapon. It's a strange thing to realize how much power you've been giving away just by trying to be understood. For a long time, you probably thought explaining yourself was the right thing to do. That if you could just find the right words, the right tone, the right reasoning, they would finally see your side. You told yourself that a relationship should be built on communication, so you kept talking, kept clarifying, kept justifying every decision, every feeling, every you know. But with a narcissist, explanations are not bridges. They're traps. Every time you explain, you hand them more material to work with. They don't listen to understand. They listen to twist, to pick apart your words until you're tangled up in them yourself, to make you question what you were so certain about only moments ago. They take your explanation and turn it into evidence that you're unreasonable, selfish, too sensitive, too demanding. And so you keep trying harder. You raise your voice or you soften it. You lay out facts, timelines, examples. You pour out your heart, thinking if I just open myself enough, they'll finally get it. But the more you explain, the more you feel yourself slipping, like you're pouring water into a well with no bottom. Here's what you need to see. Your endless explanations aren't helping the relationship. They're feeding the dynamic that's breaking you. Because in that moment, your need to be understood becomes their weapon. If they can keep you explaining, they can keep you doubting. And if they can keep you doubting, they can keep you under control. This is why silence terrifies them. Not the cold, punishing kind of silence that comes from resentment, but the stillness of someone who has stopped justifying themselves. When you reach that point, when you simply say, no, this is my decision, or this is how I feel, and then stop, you take away their ability to twist your words into a trap. You refuse to enter the debate that was never meant to find truth, only to wear you down. But getting to that place is not easy, because it means letting go of something in yourself, the hope that if you could just explain it perfectly, they would finally change. That hope has probably kept you in the cycle for years. Letting it go can feel like admitting defeat. But it's not defeat, it's clarity. You're not giving up on truth. You're accepting that you don't have to sell it to anyone in order for it to be real. When you stop explaining yourself, you shift the entire balance of power. Suddenly, they can't keep the argument alive on their terms. They can't bait you into defending your own worth, because your worth is no longer up for discussion. And that's when you start to see them for who they are without the haze of negotiation. And someone who is never looking for mutual understanding, only for dominance. They will notice the shift. They might accuse you of being difficult or unfair. They might say you're shutting down communication. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is you're refusing to participate in a conversation that was never meant to be honest in the first place. You are closing the door they kept walking through to undermine you. And here's something else. When you stop explaining, you free up a tremendous amount of emotional energy. Energy you've been wasting on arguments that always ended in the same place. Energy you can now use to rebuild your life, your focus, your sense of self. The silence you feared becomes space. And in that space, you start to remember what it feels like to think without someone else's voice in your head. But make no mistake, they will push hard against this change. They will poke, provoke, guilt, and charm, all in an effort to pull you back into the old rhythm. Because when you stop explaining, they are left alone with themselves. And that is their worst nightmare. Without your justifications to twist, without your defenses to dismantle, they have to face the emptiness of their own arguments. This is why your silence is not passive. It's powerful. It's a refusal to fuel the game. It's a statement that you no longer seek their permission to exist as you are. And it's the one move they can't counter, because it forces them to fight an enemy they can't manipulate: your certainty. The second you stop explaining yourself, you take away their last weapon. And in that quiet, you finally hear the truth they've been trying to drown out. Your voice, steady and sure, no longer asking to be believed, simply standing as it is.